So here we are in my man cave, and you can see there's the work desk, and that's where all the good ideas come from. They do come at all, and here you start to see the musical instruments. That has my little recording suite. Try to ignore the bottle of whiskey in the background. That's where I record music. It has all the software and the hardware for that. More guitars, including my Ashton black left-handed Strat copy. And we have the telescope, another hobby, more musical stuff. So you can see the hobbies here. And then my elliptical for when the ideas are not coming. I do a little low impact aerobic exercise. All this. So this is the man cave as it sits now. It didn't always look this way, though, this room. This room had a series of boxes and bags of old clothes, old shoes, really old possessions, most of which belonged to my wife, and it filled this room. So in fact, the man cave that you see now started off looking a heck of a lot more like this room. A bunch of basically crap in it. You see there's still a lot of crap here. So what happened was one day my wife and kids were away, and I just kind of took over and converted, started throwing things into bags. I was very careful not to throw out anything that looked valuable. And I actually had 3 bags, things that I was sure I shouldn't throw out, things that I was sure I was going to throw out, and then things that I gave my wife and kids time to have a look at to decide whether they needed to keep them. And then basically did the cleaning and scrubbing and hung the blinds. Not a great job on the blinds, but I just needed something there. Did the wall print. The cabinets were already in. And so basically I converted this space into a home office plus hobbies, as opposed to a room filled with boxes and bags of junk. Another important thing to keep in mind here is that the man cave is on the other side of the property. That is the house proper that we live in, whereas the man cave is on the other side of the property, is very much separate from the house. Now, a lot of the ideas that we will cover here can be a little bit confronting because I'm always talking about running averages. In general, men do this. In general, man caves are like this. In general, husbands do these things. Keep in mind, this is not 100% true of every single household that we find. So it is going to be easy for some people to say, that doesn't apply here, or that's not the way we do things in my household, or what you're saying doesn't apply to the way that my wife and I make decisions. And I get that, and that's fine, and that's good. But what we see here already, though, is a series of ideas that characterize a lot of man caves. So if you were to go around and do an inventory of man caves from one household to the next, you'd find a series of common elements, right? So the first thing is that man caves do, in fact, tend to be separated from the house proper, so that they're not in the main house, but they're in some ways separated. It could be as simple as locating them in a basement or in a garage or in a shed, something like that. But they will not be part of the main house that your wife might consider taking people on a tour of when she is showing off her home. And the other thing is, because they are separate physically, it tends to be his space, his way of controlling things. He determines how things look, even so far as to suggest who can come in. I don't have that luxury here. Anybody can come in to my man cave. But this otherness, this separateness, is really a common theme when we talk about man caves. Another thing, man caves tend to be created because he has a series of possessions that are deemed no longer fit for the household proper. And he does not want to part with these possessions, but he is therefore forced to find some alternate space for these possessions. And you can see that this sort of does connect, at least to some extent. I think my wife kind of likes my guitars, and the telescope is very nice. But I also suggest that there are probably other things in this man cave, like the recording suite and the hardware, that she probably wouldn't want in the household proper. Third thing is that man caves often come into existence because somebody needs a home office. It's more than likely to be him, and he therefore creates a man cave so he has somewhere to work. And that clearly, that idea applies to my man cave. And the fourth theme is that man caves often come into existence because he has converted inhospitable space to something hospitable. He's taken something that isn't livable and, based on his handicraft, has converted it into livable space. And again, I did mention that this was a filthy, dirty place that looked an awful lot like the crowded room further down here. And I would have to say that converting the man cave from something like this at least did take some aspect of kind of a do-it-yourself approach to things on my part. So the man cave is very much characterized by a sense of otherness, a sense of control. He controls the space. It's his space designed the way he likes it. Oftentimes he will work there and do office work at home from that space. And he's probably put a little bit of labor into that space and into making that space work for him the way he wants it to be. What happens if you talk to women about man caves? It turns out that women will have very definite ideas about man caves and what they're there for and what they're like. I've done multiple focus groups with women in various cohorts. And some of the themes that come up over and over again when you talk about a man cave, there's something inherently childish or childlike. It's to them, man caves are men sort of reverting back to their youth, or reverting back to their teen years in some way. Could that be the case with my guitars and my keyboard? Is this sort of a rock and roll fantasy that we see here in the man cave? Yeah, maybe to some extent. I'd have to cop to that. Another thing that women will say about man caves is that they are inherently gross and dirty and filthy in some way, and that they don't really want any part of them. I got to give myself some higher marks on this. I don't think that this is particularly filthy. In fact, this man cave is a lot cleaner and a lot nicer a space than what I inherited. But there's something inherently gross. In addition to being childlike, man caves are gross and nasty in places that women wouldn't necessarily want to be. The other theme that women talk about when they talk about man caves is they do respect the idea of control, that it is his space, that he controls it, he determines what it looks like. It's almost like they concede the space to their husbands, the women in these focus groups. But that does beg the question. If the man cave is his, for him to control, who controls the rest of the house on the other side of the property? And a great deal of research would suggest that wives, mothers, control the domestic space and the activities that go on in that domestic space. And while that may seem to be a good thing, study after study in culture after culture suggests that women, mothers in particular, wind up doing far more than 50% of the domestic labor that's necessary to make a family household work. And that puts women, particularly mothers, at a disadvantage when it comes to having enough time, enough mental energy, and enough emotional energy to divert to their careers. And so we see almost a direct relationship between the metaphor of the man cave and that other metaphor that we talk about all the time, the glass ceiling. So part of what we're going to explore with some of these videos is what are we going to do to get rid of man caves and glass ceilings once and for all.